So I am here this time on this lovely tour bus here in downtown Detroit, Michigan, sitting with Ronan Harris of VNV Nation. How's it going, man?
Very good. I got my second morning coffee, so everything's getting slowly better.
That's awesome. Thanks for inviting me onto the bus. Thanks for sitting down with me.
My pleasure. I'm happy you wanted to do the interview, to be honest. So
it's great. I wasn't very familiar with your work until I got the email saying that you were on tour, and it gave me an opportunity to start taking a bit of a dive into your music. Specifically, I sat down a couple of days ago and wanted to just kind of listen to the new album in its entirety. And it starts off, it's really, really interesting, completely different than the stuff that I would normally listen to, but really, really melodic and electronic, and I liked it and I loved it. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a full piano piece, and it's just pure piano. And that is when I went, oh, I'm interested now.
Okay.
So now that I've told you where my little
let me give you. I don't think even familiarity with the band is necessary. Noir is an album where I think I went up several notches in my production, songwriting, everything. I got into a zone. I was channeling something I can't even begin to explain. I have never believed in rules for albums. So people who come back and go, you can't do that on an album. I say, well, I did. And that's why I do it. It's not that I'm only doing it just to do something no one's ever done. I do what I like. I make music for myself that inspires a feeling within me. And I hope by doing so that will connect with people outside. Noir is an album that I believe has to be listened to from beginning to end. It is, in essence, a concept album that is inspired by the night. When I originally conceived of it, I wrote the very first track, sitting at my desk, working at my computer, and I have a little keyboard in front of me. And I like organic sounds, that they're not specifically synthesizer, or they don't sound like anything that they could be. There's a lot of guitarists who try to go for very processed, very interesting sounds, like very decayed sounds, like you even have experimental artists playing with with tape techniques where they kind of decay the sound. And I love 70s, there's a lot of 70s symphonic electronic rock that I love, and a lot of artists from the time, and it's pure vibe. And that's the kind of sound that I always gravitate towards. I like so many different styles of music. I think I threw everything but the kitchen sink into this one. I'm going to get to the Nocturne in a second. I started out with this drone. I wanted it to be this relentless, menacing drone that grows and grows and grows, with lyrics that really hit people, and that it is the presage to the album. Hence the lyrics, and it's setting the whole tone and bringing you into a space. And it's a journey. It's the word noir. Why I used this word wasn't just arbitrary. None of my album titles are arbitrary. They all relate to a concept within the album that every song is somehow an interpretation of the title, or somehow related to it. Noir was an idea that some composers and writers, painters in the late 1800s, particularly in France, used as a way to describe, there's this, we all know this, it's a nighttime feeling. You're sitting alone, you're musing, you're going through your thoughts. There's a different form of creativity that happens at night. There's almost like a seductiveness. It's like a delve into the psyche. And I very much channel that in this. The very first track, Million, is very much a sort of an opus towards that. And then it sort of goes through its various phases, but it takes people left, right, up, down. It's not an album where you hear one track and you think, oh, that's what the vibe of this album is. There's no representative track, and I see it as a whole. And I can't write music where everything fits in a particular style or genre. It's very varied, and it's almost like, as somebody described, either the soundtrack to a book that hasn't been written, that it invites you to imagine what would that film or book be, and how do all these pieces relate to a story. So I found that very interesting for me, because I knew what I was writing, but I'd never heard it from that perspective. I always find it very interesting when people analyze an album and come back to me with their thoughts. It is a journey. It is a metaphor of a psychological journey, like a journey through the self.
I think the part that stuck with me the most was, as I'm a musician myself as well, though not musically trained. I'm not a guy with a lot of theory.
Nor am I.
When you hear because the album itself, especially the first couple of intro songs, or the first couple of songs on the album, have a very like 80s new agey kind of.
I mean, the opener is more. I think a couple of the tracks take their cues from, say, taking some cues from, say, underground techno. Now, when people hear the word techno, they immediately, if they're not from a dance music background, they immediately imagine horrible commercial music, which is actually that's like saying that Mumford and Sons, when you say, oh, we play guitar music, and someone immediately imagines Breakfast at Tiffany's or something like that. It's like, no. There's so much soundscaping going on in electronic scenes, and it's not about making electronic sounds, it's using it as a means to create a soundscape that's beyond the regular palette. A lot of guitar bands do this, where they're becoming very hybrid in creating sounds that are taking you to a whole other level. You know, the guitar, bass, and drum thing has been around for, as long as you can say the 50s, when that actual grouping started to become a format. And yet you have bands like, say, Explosions in the Sky, who go and do things where it's dream music, and they're still using the exact same instruments, but yet another band can sound like Rammstein. It's incredible what you can do with the palette. It doesn't put it into a box just because it's electronic. For me, I've always used orchestral sounds, I've always used organic sounds and acoustic sounds, and I pulled in a ton of 50s and 60s gear for it. I collect old gear just to give things this essence, this vibe, I wanted to inherit the decay that was in those boxes, because it's some of the best pieces that have been played on the crappiest amps.
Right.
And that's the sound that people are looking for, and yet when you hear a piece of music through it, you go, I wouldn't buy the thing. Why do you want that?
People get stuck on and I don't know if you swing this way, but I think people get stuck on the gear stuff far too much. They get stuck on the idea that, oh, well, you need this guitar and this tone to get that sound, and really it's the musician, it's the person.
I got a better analogy.
Sure.
Somebody hands you a Stradivarius. Doesn't mean you're going to play like a virtuoso. It's like, another analogy would be someone hands you the keys to a Ferrari. It does not mean you're going to be a race driver. The fact is, it is a tool. Can you use it? And some of the worst equipment, the lowest fidelity equipment has been used for some of the greatest pieces in the world. When we talk about how broad my music listening is, one of the things I loved when I was a teenager was listening to Robert Johnson. And he's like, there's a guy in a crappy studio. They probably have a Silvertone recording, but I don't know what equipment they used for recording it at the time. But it was the fact that it was the pure soul, the pure absolute human spirit came radiating out of this music. And I've heard that in a lot of other artists. And I've heard artists who they overdo it on production. They overdo it on, like, I need this instrument. It's like compensation for an insecurity that they have to have banks of everything. They follow blogs and buy the latest and greatest of everything, rather than master something that the best things come out of the simplest sources. So when we talk about the Nocturne, I was musing. I don't have a piano in my studio, and I love the idea of having the accessibility to this huge palette of sounds to give me the tools I need to at least come some way towards expressing things that are going on in my head. So I often sit alone playing a piano keyboard, like a weighted piano controller, and I have an incredible emulator that I've worked with an orchestra, and the concert pianist who worked with me on it and the arranger both recommended this, that it will give you the feeling that you love. Now, I say I wasn't formally trained, I taught myself, what have you, and I play what I feel based on all the music I've listened to, as musicians do. It somehow filters through. And there was a function in the computer that I heard tell of, where I'm sitting there playing away, like it's like you're possessed. I mean, the word inspiration comes from, inspiritus. It's like the angel speaking through you or whatever. I felt like I'd hit a moment, as all musicians know, where they're just playing something absolutely divine, and it's speaking to you. You're almost telling a story through it, which is what I'm doing with that piece with the Nocturne. I also thought an album called Noir would be a kind of a failing of mine if I didn't have a Nocturne on there, because I have such a big love of classical music, and it plays a part in a lot of the music that I write, although not tangibly, like as in it's
the background.
It's
fundamental.
Even things like scales or chord phrasing or like with the arpeggios, even on the most poppy song, it doesn't matter. It could be the darkest of the poppy song. There's an element of formal music in there or experimentation that people have done through the decades. So I played this thing for about 15 minutes, and I was like, okay, how do I recreate this? I have no idea how I did this. I just played. And because I'm playing to my thoughts, I'm using music in order to, that's my mechanism for communication.
You're in flow.
Right. I'm not an artist, like as a painter or visual artist or what have you. So I found this function that basically tells you everything you've just played.
Yeah,
and you repaste it, and I was like, okay, all right, we're going to do this very, very carefully, right? We're going to very, very carefully, like all wrong notes and everything in pauses, because you don't know where you're going. It's like the music is leading you. And when people jam and they write the greatest pieces, and I'm not saying mine is the greatest, but for me it was.
Right.
For me it was the watershed in a way, because it showed me that I'd unleashed something with this album. The last year leading up to it have really opened me up to so many incredible new experiences, and mindset-wise, I was in the zone. So I found the function. I went off to another computer, and I'm like reading up on it. Okay, carefully, make sure of this. Okay, reading everyone's comment. You know, somebody posts a question, 20 people reply with nothing.
Bullshit answers.
Bullshit answers. Well, I like to use this piece of equipment. And that was not the question, and I'm very happy for you, but shut up. Then that's the internet.
Birth of internet trolling.
Right. It's like me, listen, everybody listen to me. Well, I kind of prefer it. Anyway, so the thing was, concerned citizen and all that kind of stuff. So I found this, and I went back and I repasted it, and then I basically spent a lot of time rewriting, like actually doing musical scoring and sitting down with the actual sheet music and going, okay, I'm actually going to challenge myself to learn this better than I've ever learned it before. I did a lot of like self-tutelage and phrasing and chord theory. And I've always played with odd chords, even though I don't think it always works with the music that I try to make. It has its place, and it's had its moments where it's done some beautiful things. Incidentally, we have one of our keyboarders who plays with us, David, who's the guy who just left before we started recording, is a very savant jazz pianist. Absolutely incredible. He listens to one piece of music and he just starts playing it. And I'm to a complicated level. So that was kind of like my long run around to your answer.
Well, basically what I was getting at, what really struck me when I was listening to it, and Nocturne is the name of the...
Nocturne number 7, because I've written many.
I think what stood out to me is that when you're introduced to electronic music as a person who's not necessarily involved in that culture, you think about it as one sort of thing and one sort of like box. But when I heard that piece, it occurred to me almost just in that moment, not just about you specifically, but about music in general, that it reminded me that the music that you're hearing comes from a place.
And I don't like borders. It's funny, you talk about electronic music that being in a box. There's a lot of people who make electronic music who want it to sound like electronic music.
Right.
There's a lot of people who make rock that they want it to sound like rock. I guess, and there's a quintessential, somehow an abstract idea of what that
Jimmy
entails.
Page, 1974, that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, and every guitarist has okay, I'm practicing my feedback today.
Right.
While I may be governed by certain rules or certain things that I've gone through culturally, I also like to embrace. I've embraced so many other ideas. Even on previous albums, they became rockier. And there's an album called Judgment, which was, I think, the most rock-influenced album I did at the time. But it was a little bit more sort of late 80s punk influence, some hardcore, a lot of different things in it. But the whole thing was to put out a message. There's also the element that I like people to be able to dance to this, because I grew up in that culture that music had a big part in dance culture, but on an underground level, not on a commercial. This isn't about bros, raging. These are words I don't understand because they don't exist in Europe. And I'm quite happy about that. This was about getting into a mind space. So a lot of electronic music has always been about, there's been the pop side of it. But the people who are unconcerned with commercial success are the people who just sit there in their headspace, like people in the 70s did, like the Klaus Schulzes or the Vangelis or Tangerine Dreams. They were painting a whole new abstract picture that was almost like people writing fantasy novels. It doesn't exist until I create it. And suddenly I've created whole new worlds and envisaged them. And I love that aspect of the pioneering era. Then it became formulated, as things always do. Every genre there's a formula that will evolve from it. And I like to transcend that. People try to put my music into a category, and they say in the end, we just call it VNV, because I have so many different styles. You've heard there's ambient tracks on there, there's post-classical, there's pieces of weird electronica on there, but they could just as easily be rock tracks, like a bit of, there's a bit of Deep Purple influence in there. There's like John Lord's keyboard playing on this track Guiding was a big thing for me. I loved Deep Purple when I was a kid. This is going to surprise a lot of people who like VNV, and they're going to be like, oh, really? But then at the same time, there's Pink Floyd experimented with electronic music and incorporating into theirs to give themselves the bigger palette, because they weren't just playing a guitar to sound like a guitar. They were creating something that was beyond the musical experience, that it's taking your mind and your soul to another dimension. And while that might sound a bit intellectual or hippie for a lot of people, too bad, because this is kind of how I think. Storytelling, and it's stories that don't even need words. Music, as I've grown to know over the years, is my way of expressing myself to people. I can say in a 5-minute song, in 3 verses or 2 verses and a chorus, something I could not tell people in a whole day. It's bizarre.
You said you get some people that will write you and whether, I don't know if you use the word critique, but basically like tell you what your music
has done for them, sure.
Because like it seems to me that music for you is a form of communication.
Right.
When you get that feedback back, do you spend any time sort of comparing notes?
Oh, there's
like, is that important to you?
Comparing notes with people, I find it interesting how they perceive it, but it doesn't take away from the fact it's almost like someone is giving you a cliff notes of something much bigger. I can't encapsulate the music in words. I can try to describe it to you, but it is ultimately a human experience. It's something that you will perceive on a level that's beyond words, as all music does. But when we do, it invited conversation. It actually got me to thinking that I was talking to my girlfriend about this yesterday, and I said, I never thought about this, but because I've always said that these songs are like a diary for me. They're like aspects of my life, my philosophies, my observations, and what have you. Whether it be the musical and the lyrics are a very, very, very important part of VNV Nation. They're not just arbitrary. I don't believe that if you're saying something, you should just have nothing to say. So the thing that I found was, and I was talking with the person who had said to me that this was art inspiring art, because they were trying to imagine what the film would be like. And I said, okay, that's interesting. Tell me your visuals, because that's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
So that's the note comparison, not the description, because that's purely subjective.
Okay.
Give me an idea. Describe, like in the most abstract way or simplistic way, the images that you see.
You write visually. When you're writing, right. you're building images, building scenes in your mind.
Things, and it's the feeling of it. It's like to a you could have a blind person or a deaf person, but they will say the exact same thing according to their needs. For me, music paints. It's not synesthesiastic. It's close. I do have a form of synesthesia, but I'm seeing something that is on a grander scale, and my feeling of that image or my feeling of the sound is what I'm trying to create. It's a point I'm trying to reach.
So that's interesting, because you work in a genre where the visuals associated with what you do are actually really important.
In a sense, but I also think that I put it another way. If somebody imagines something where I say that is the category of what I want, what I was hoping to communicate. If it inspired you to imagine it and represent it in that way, you got it, because you represented it in a way that was unique to you as a person, but it's exactly what I wanted. It's really hard to explain. I
love watching you try, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wrote a song, some years ago where people always ask me, what is the song about? And I said, you're going about it the wrong way. You're missing the point. It's a story, it's an analogy, it's a vessel to tell, using a vessel to express somebody's thoughts and feelings within a song. I said, well, who's it about? I went, well, are these words that you would want to express about someone, that you would long to express about someone, or that you already do, or you have? And they said, well, yes. I said, good. If this is how you feel inside, regardless of what you visualize or who you visualize, what you imagine I might have been writing about, then this was about you. Because all I've done is use this as a vessel, and the song was not the point. The reaction to it was the point. I wrote a song in order to invoke something, that this is how I wanted to feel about someone. It was a point in my life I needed to reaffirm myself, reaffirm my sense of soul, and I needed to restate this, like almost like a not a rallying cry, but a reaffirmation, I guess, suffices. But I was saying how I feel about what agape is, like the highest form of love, the most divine form of love, how I would feel that way about somebody, or a time of my life, or just the fact of being alive.
But you weren't building on reference, you were building on desire.
It wasn't on desire, it was something far beyond that. Okay. So, and I said, how do I convey that? And somehow the words came to me that I could convey this through a kind of a story. And the song is called Beloved, and a lot of people, they adore the song. It starts off quite mellow or quite dramatic, and then goes into this big sort of epic trance type thing, but that helped the feeling of this jubilation that this person feels of realizing that be happy for the time you've had with somebody or in a situation and not always miss it. I think those feelings are irrelevant, and they do nothing to you in your life except poison it. It was about being thankful for things you've had, not things you haven't, and having something taken away from you. Be thankful for when you had it. And
gratitude.
It is a gratitude, both to the universe and to the other person. And I needed a vessel in order to convey that. So that gives you an idea of how I write music. I'm trying to, as best I can, communicate through glass without words.
I get that. I dig. We've gone into a very heady space.
Oh my God, we have.
But it's okay. So the way I normally start these shows, we'll do it now.
All right.
Is getting a lot of background about my guests.
Okay.
And I'm very interested in your background. To set it up a little bit, you born in Ireland.
I was born in Dublin. I lived there till I was just finished college. I went to college a bit earlier.
Oh, okay. I actually thought you would come to Canada much earlier.
Oh, no. I went to London first because there were no jobs in Ireland.
What year did you go to London?
87, end of 87.
Okay, so you were in Ireland through the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, I was born in 67.
And it wasn't the safest place on the planet to be living through.
Well, living in a republic was okay. We were very aware of what was going on across the border in Northern Ireland. We were very connected with it. It's very hard to distance yourself from it when your family have in the past been involved, like my mother's family were heavily involved in the revolution and heavily involved in the struggle to free Ireland. I had a very different opinion of it because I was an intellectual, I guess. I was somebody who, I was somewhat, I don't know, I hate to use the word autistic, but I had this super logical and at the same time super emotional view of things, that I would analyze things and take myself out of the situation and see an awful lot. I didn't understand humans, as a kid, like under the age of 10. The phrase a girl used recently and I thought was absolutely phenomenal was, I felt like I was born without a manual for humans. And
it's just weird because you used a phrase that I've only ever heard, and this is going to sound stupid, I've used that specific phrase often,
right,
and never heard anybody else kind of say it.
I guess I thought about it, and you've tried to come up with a tangible phrase that expresses it, but I adapted, I tried to copy, I tried to learn, but at the same time, me as who I really was operating in tandem, and you try to build social skills and what have you, and eventually you get it, you grow out of it. But
what was it like growing up in Ireland?
Difficult for me. I was a strange kid, and most kids that I grew up around were interested in very basic things. They didn't dream, they didn't imagine. Irish people were very much about dash your dreams, put that out of your head, son, you'll never get anywhere, nothing ever good's ever going to happen. The Scots have a lot of that too. We live
with British grandparents, English grandparents.
Right.
It's
cold, wet islands, but Ireland is stunningly beautiful. But I was one of those people who would stop and see things that everyone else would walk past, and I would see the beauty of things. I love that my parents always ensured that we took our holidays in Ireland, so I got to see every corner of it, and I got to see the beauty of it. I travelled through Northern Ireland many times. I was one harrowing occasion where we were scheduled on a school trip to stop in a town, and the town had just been bombed. A bomb had gone off, and I got to see the carnage. I loathed hearing people talk of hate, and your parents, and it's not their fault. They grew up in a time that imprinted it on them, and it's hard to escape from that when you're told it from the word go. And it's taught me a great deal about life of understanding people, but also explains them there is the ability to change. You can overwrite this brainwashing. And I just loathe the fact that people could hate one another for for ridiculous reasons. When there was no, it was like having an issue with someone next door because you don't like the color of their car, and that amping you up, and you're still eventually becomes an intangible loathing of that person. Neighbors hating each other is a great example of how humans do stuff like that. And there's absolutely no relevance in anything. There's no purpose in anything they're doing. They're just stuck in a loop.
I want to hear about that specific experience going through that time.
Okay. I got to see them cleaning up. There were blankets over bodies and stuff like that. We pretty much just arrived. And
this
nobody
was a fucking field trip.
We were supposed to be going to a location at the very top of Ireland. We had to drive through Northern Ireland, and the location we were going to was in Northern Ireland. And we stopped outside the town, and there was just chaos because nobody.
And it just happened.
It had literally just happened. I mean, it was like hours old, and sorry. Get very emotional about it because, well, it's hard for me to think my country's been scourged by this stupid conflict, and we got past that, and that was the most amazing thing. I never thought in my lifetime, and I apologize for this, I never thought in my lifetime I'd ever see a day where people would actually put their fucking guns down. I apologize for swearing as well, but being Irish, I don't know.
My audience is used to it.
All right, good. Okay, because I'm Irish and we use swear words like punctuation. I'll try not to, but try not to offend. It was just the stupid pettiness of it, and that was something that always amazed me about humans, and it still does this day, how they spend so much energy worrying and arguing about things that are completely irrelevant, and there are greater issues at play. Whether it be the survival of our species or something like, go back a step and say, like, the future of our species and where we're going as a people, where we're going as what kind of world we're going to bequeath our offspring in 100 years, 200 years. That's what I've always wondered. I've always been frustrated by that idea, but I've come to through a lot of time to a place of peace, of understanding it, that a lot of people just are not ready. They're just incapable. They've grown up in a lifestyle that they are not able to conceive of such thoughts, and it really takes people to lead, to actually take us there. I hope it's either the next generation or their children that takes us there, because we're kind of running out of time. So, when you're a child, I mean, we're young teenagers, and you see this. You see blankets over bodies. It isn't the first time I've seen something like that. There were bomb scares in Dublin, and we knew the fears. We heard the news every day. It was like, who was shot, who was killed. People have been murdered indiscriminately for decades, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And as you get older, you start to wonder, who's really behind this, and who's gaining from this as you become a little bit more intelligent and you become more cognitive? Who's gaining from this? Why would anybody want to perpetuate a struggle? What is their real end game? Do they not see that their goal is not possible? That there is no play here unless it's a stalemate? And it was just that, well, if we give up, we will be steamrolled. And if we keep fighting, at least we're still at the table. And I thought, that's a horrible way to think. That you have to conclude that you will never achieve your goals, but if you give up, you will lose everything. Now, there was a situation in Northern Ireland, we all knew about it, like there was a kind of a form of apartheid once upon a time, and that was born out of political history. I don't give a damn. Well, it's relevant, but it's not something that needs to be perpetuated. I had, as a teenager, you grow up in a country which is almost singularly, everyone's Catholic, Irish, and pockets of people from different nationalities or backgrounds around. I went out to understand religion because I wanted to read what does everyone else believe in this world, and that brought me into a greater space of seeing everything universally. In reading about Zoroastrianism or Buddhism or Shintoism or Hinduism, and going through all these texts and just finding out, like, okay, well, what do the different Christian groups believe? And I found this wasn't even, Christianity wasn't even giving me my answers when I was a kid, because you're obliged, you're basically bored into it. No, you go to church because there is a God. Like, well, where? You can ask questions. At least in Judaism, you're allowed to ask questions. So it wasn't answering my questions, and I felt it was a dumbed-down version of an operating system that people need in order to conceive and understand the universe, that gives some simple answers, that explains, like an analogy, a simple story for children about how you explain to them how the universe works.
Did cynicism start to play a factor through it? No.
I have never been... I've had my points where I've just said, like, I've shook my head, and I never got bitter and twisted and cynical. The whole idea of this victory not vengeance thing was, like VNV, what the letters stand for, was we'd seen 1984 on video in a friend's house. And, as you become a teenager, you start to find other people who think like you, whether they go to your school or other schools, and you just coalesce into a group. And everybody there was the son of the local rabbi, he was one of my friends. There was a friend of mine who was an exchange student from Morocco, and we're all just exchanging ideas and cultures and everything like that. And it was amazing. I just seem to want to meet people from the rest of the world, because I want to know what they think and what they feel, and what a different culture feels like. I had friends who were Protestants, which was just, at the time in the 80s, was this stigma that was buried in the back of your head, and I hated it because I wasn't responsible for that. There was no logical thought behind that. It's like where somebody says, oh, they killed our Lord, or something like that. You hear these phrases growing up, and I found that other cultures heard the same things too. It wasn't just ours.
So it always threw me, it's like they weren't even fucking there. Why
are
we pointing down?
Right. Everybody needed a scapegoat. It's just an easy way to, people need to out I understand it from a psychological point. And I understand from a sociological point or an anthropological point in our evolution what the mechanism is, what purpose it serves. I just don't necessarily have to agree that it's right.
And I also don't get it as a reason to do shit now.
Right. Especially now. The veil is we're at a point where it just seems like the veil has been pulled, or there's one curtain been pulled back, and we can see a lot more of what's the truth, and it's dawning on people. There's a generation of us that were traumatized by the internet, which is why we became so ragey online, because we couldn't handle the fact that rather than just deal with a couple of people that you ran into every day, suddenly there's everybody, and they're all screaming at once. Everyone's got the mic. And the first generation to encounter the internet was just completely traumatized by it, can't realize that they are, and are acting out of this trauma, out of this hurt. And it's like constantly on the defensive, or constantly on the retaliation against anybody, making someone else pay for what they've experienced, and becoming bitter, twisted people. But I have to get back to the VNV thing. I'm sorry, I digress terribly. We'd seen 1984, and this was just something. The 80s was the Cold War. We were all worried about, are we going to die tomorrow? Is the nuclear war going to go off wherever the bombs hit? Things like that, where kids went to bed panicking. Chernobyl happened. And everybody was just, it was the only incident of, let's say, a nuclear incident in the 80s that we knew about. And it scared us. We lived in a time where we thought, well, what would it be like living under the Russians? Like, living under the Russians, what would it be like living in a post-nuclear world? Like a post-atomic war world? Now, watching 1984 as a movie, I didn't get to see it in the cinema, unfortunately. And we were sitting in a pub because drinking laws and age checks they were different back then. Right? And we're sitting there, we started coming up with like fake propaganda slogans because in the book it's like, ignorance is strength and freedom is slavery. As though they meant something. And we started coming up with our own. And I said, I'm not going to ever put down Ireland. I love Ireland, and I think I'm so proud to be Irish. It is a beautiful country, and it produced some incredible creative people. But as I found through either their poetry or their writings or their work in the theatre, Ireland was just the centre of theatre craft that was just unparalleled. They themselves felt detached from a nation that was ostensibly just getting on with the deal of we're farmers, we're blue-collar workers, we're not very financially well off, we're all struggling, we're all trying to make a buck here. Somehow out of that the creatives kept going. You've got people like Brennan Behan who had some choice phrases, and the phrase that has stuck with me forever is like, and everyone has a great quote, or you'll have a quote from George Bernard Shaw or something like that. Brennan Behan's quote is "fuck the begrudgers." I just thought, that's him in a nutshell. It's beautiful. It's like simple, to the point, and it's about as Ireland as it gets. It's like, if they don't like you, fuck them. You know, so what? But you don't feel that as a teenager. You still feel judged, and a lot of people, out of their own experience of growing up, are telling you what your problem is. And everyone has an opinion where they think they can sum up the whole opinion and describe it as though that somehow ends the issue we're talking about. And it was just, everybody's
got a nice little bow to put
right, and but they're not solving anything, and they're not concluding anything. They're just, I managed to describe and encapsulate the situation in my own view. Ireland has changed. The country I grew up in is gone. Dublin is gone. The Dublin I knew is totally rebuilt.
For better?
I don't know. I think for the people who live there now, maybe. But Dublin was full of the hundreds of years of history were still there. You could touch them. You could walk steps that people had walked in books. You could go to places where, whether they be literary figures or or creatives, say, or historical figures, had stood and walked and struggled and what have you. People are written about in books. You could go to the setting of those places. They were still there. The money hadn't come in to tear everything down. And then there was a property orgy that happened in the 90s where someone went, hey, housing prices have gone up magically. This is always how, I don't know how this happens, but somehow, suddenly, there's this crazy demand. Everyone suddenly needs a house. Well, that's magical. So let's build thousands of houses, and let's knock down all the forests that I walked in as a kid. Let's erase all the green belts. Let's build endless neighborhoods of houses that are all worth this high price because, hey, banks saw an opportunity to loan money and have these objects, which are meaningless objects that have a value on their balance sheet, says, hey, our stock value is this because, well, we own all of this. None of this means anything. Money does not mean anything. It's only as much as what the other person wants to pay for it. That's all it is.
I will not very often will I give any credit to meme culture, but the one piece of meme culture that has always stuck with me was the idea of I get up every day to go to a job that I hate to make money to pay for stuff that I neither want nor need, and don't have time to do any of the stuff that I want to do because I'm forced to do it.
And it's bizarrely enough, I mean, people I've always met through my life who said you can free yourself from that. I never understood what that meant. And then it slowly started to click that so much is irrelevant. Well, a lot of what had to do with that was...
the birth of nihilism.
Well, no. I am not a nihilist. I would steer away from that seriously because I don't believe that everything is... Nihilism to me is nothing matters. And it doesn't matter what we do. It's all just, abstract. And French philosophy was fascinating, but there is... I recognize that I somehow have this spiritual quality, or as in spiritualism. It's a very, very loose word that a lot of people use for so many things. But that there's this greater sphere of life, that everything is connected, and that has always guided me. And I was aware of it even before I was aware of it. I didn't know it. And as I got older, it started to dawn more on me, and I felt like an acolyte. I was learning as I went. I realize that so much of what we argue about on this planet is completely useless. It's when I see people arguing about the pettiest of things, I wish that I could take that energy and bottle it up and use it for something that we really need It's like having a big budget and using most of it on things that small little groups of people who whine and argue about need, rather than spending on something that in the end will benefit everybody and will change that culture that caused all the whining and all of that, and give us a little bit more substance to our lives. So I guess growing up in Ireland taught me an amazing amount. It taught me about people. It taught me about grievances and grudges. And
tell me about the house you grew up in. Tell me about mom and dad.
You're the first person who's ever asked it. You are the first person who's ever asked me that question. So that's bizarre. I'm serious. I've done interviews now. I'm getting a little bit emotional because that's the reason for it. Because there was a loss in the family. Like, you know, it's not, no. It's all right. It's all right. I came back from Japan after doing the video for When Is the Future, and found out my mother had died while I was away. So my father and mother came from nothing. My father grew up in a working class neighborhood, working class family. His father had been in the Merchant Navy. They were tough. They pushed each other. They all became something. They all became greater people as a result. People struggled to get out. And my dad, we've never connected. Never. We were on two completely different levels. And he was an avid sportsman. He had been an avid boxer when he was a kid. He was in the cadets. Like he was, you know, he wanted to be part of, you know, doing the things that guys should do. He was 50s Boys Life magazine, like incarnate. And he learned that if I want people to take me seriously, I have to present myself seriously. I have to communicate with them. They have to not judge me before I walk in the door. And he built himself up into something great and became a very successful person, but a modest person and a very humble person. My mom grew up on a farm in a 3-room cottage with no running water and no power. That's what her life was like in the 30s. And got out of it, went to Dublin, became a nurse. And we were very heavily connected with our family in the countryside, spent a lot of time there in Tipperary. I have 3 brothers, 1 sister. They've all gone off. My sister's gone off, and she put feminism brilliantly when someone asked her, like, you know, why can't you just stop being just a mom or just being like a housewife? And she goes, my right as a feminist is that I choose this and no one tells me otherwise. You do not fuck with my sister. She will lay you out flat. She had a better right hook than any of us. And I could still be, you know, the sweet, you know, kind of essence of life and whatever else in the universe. But she's strong. She went through a lot. She brought up 3 great kids. I was the second oldest. I was very much to say black sheep doesn't quite describe it. I was very different as a child, and I recognized that how difficult it must have been for my parents to try to understand that. They had grown up in a world where this was not something that they could ever conceive of dealing with.
What does that mean? Because you don't seem like the type that would have been like running around throwing paint at walls. But
I loved how mechanisms worked. I loved doing things that make no sense. I also could not communicate like other kids. I saw the world in a completely different way, and I recognized, I was very aware of the fact that I was different from my brother. My older brother, he was the sporty guy. He was the, you know, fit in, and he still is. And I didn't know how to, I was like born empathic to the max. It wasn't that humans didn't make sense to me. I could sense things that was like having a radio listening to all channels all at the same time. And it was, I'm not trying to be self-sympathetic. It was not pleasant. School was very difficult. I was very good at school, very excelled, whatever. But I didn't understand why I couldn't connect with other kids. And I found some other oddballs or whatever else. We were all oddballs, you know. And as I grew up, and I realized that actually a lot of the oddballs were people who kept to themselves. They had that ability. I didn't know how. I was.
Sorry, I'm laughing because like you're describing my childhood. I've never heard it put that way. Is that other people were smart enough to shut the fuck up about it, and I couldn't figure that part out.
There was a lot I couldn't figure out. I just loved learning. I loved the wonder of learning. I could pick up an encyclopedia. That's my earliest memory. One of my earliest memories is hearing a synthesizer on the radio and just wanting to know what that sound was. This is long before I even knew it was a piece of electronic equipment. I must have been about 3. I've actually timed my memories back to, I remember a specific incident happening and hearing that when my mother was in the kitchen, her being upset about this, and me reacting as in, I'm not naturally able to understand these things, but feeling her feeling for her, so to speak. The empath part of me was very, very strong. And I remember the incident well, and that ties my memories to when I was about 3 years old. But my parents had books all over the house. My dad read a lot, so they had an encyclopedia given to them. You know, there's a lot of hand-me-downs and sort of things that were given from other friends, whatever. And I went through this encyclopedia from page to page to page. This was the thing for me. Anything on television that would expand my imagination, I grabbed. It wasn't I was trying. That was a reflection of who I was and what was going on inside me. I didn't want to play sports. Can't you tell? And yet I run around on stage more than I actually had someone. I was considerably bigger some years ago. I was very thin when I started out with VNV, and then my body changed as people's body changes, and I did not realize that I was actually swelling. And what I was doing was like most of my size was actually inflammation. Okay. Fun stuff. You work through it, you get under control. But anyway, I remember somebody at the side of the stage made some joke in German, and I already could speak German, and sort of said something like, yeah, check out this fat guy, him running around, how the hell does he do that? And he made some joke about, and I said, all right, do you know the lyrics to one of the songs? And he said, yeah. I said, right, I want you to come up here with me, and I want you to just do one song with me. I am very agile in that respect, and I will go from left to right. I am inspired when I feel something channeling through me. I can climb walls. I will, jump off the roof. I will abseil. I will do whatever. I don't care. I am so full of energy in that respect. So yeah, he was out of breath after about a minute and a half. That was cool. I've done this for 3.5 hours at the age of 50, and now I'm 51. We did these shows where it was the best of. So growing up, I went to a typical school.
Well, let's move out of Ireland for a moment. What brought you to Canada?
Like all good stories.
It's a girl.
Oh yeah, no,
It's a fucking girl. It's
no, don't denigrate this down to something simplistic. And I always say the same thing to people, like, because it is a great motivator. It is a beautiful motivator. Yeah. I met a woman in London, and we fell in love, and married, and went to Canada, and I became a Canadian, and I absolutely love Canada. Absolutely, still do to this day. I'm still.
I read an article from you recently where you were talking about feeling like Toronto's your second home.
It is. It's a place that when I go back to, it's like it made such. You can go and live somewhere for 6 months and you barely remember the street next to you. Oh, really? Okay. Not London, Ontario.
Yeah, London, Ontario.
Oh, okay. Maybe London, England. I was
no, unfortunately not.
Well, the thing about Toronto is I had an incredibly intense amount of things happen to me over 4 years, and it felt like I lived a lifetime.
Oh, you were only there for 4 years?
4 years.
Wait a second. You came in, became a citizen, and you were only there for 4 years. Explain that to me.
3 years to stay, and then I said, I really want to. And the thing was, and I'll explain to you why I left after 4 years, it wasn't intentional. I was working in the computer field. Things were... I had a speciality which I was honing on my own, and there was no call for it where I was working. I'd worked, one of my jobs was CBC, believe it or not, at the new headquarters in Front Street when they were building it.
A professional propagandist. Canadian, I'm allowed to say.
So I'd been living in London, and I'd worked in London in the computer field as a systems programmer, and like designing accounting systems and all kinds of fun stuff as part of a big team. But I'd honed my skills, and I grew a lot. My resume just went through the roof when I was living in Canada, and I was just interested in the new frontiers of where computing was going, because it was still ragtag collection of different protocols and different computer systems, and nothing talked to each other, and everything was standalone and proprietary and just wasn't working.
What year?
This is mid-90s.
Okay.
So I got the call to come do a job in London. And I said, you know, we're young still, we're in our 20s. Why don't we do this? Wear it out. You know, get through that and then come back to Canada. Canada at the time was still very much, even though I had most of my friends were alternative, it was still the bank adverts telling you success is having the house, the white picket fence, the kids and everything, and you know, pounding that into you every day because they had the money to put the adverts on and convincing everyone that if you weren't doing that after the age of 25, there was something wrong with you. If you weren't living in a little box out in Mississauga, you were, you know, I had my friends, like, because I'd grown up in Europe where our streets and our buildings have been around for, if not like a half a centuries, you know, and someone said, oh, I'm the one with the orange door. I was like, what? And then I got to the street, and it was just like someone had taken a picture of a house and copied it. Everything was identical. I thought, well, this isn't going to go well. Even on my street, every house looked different. Right. Every single house. So, you know, I grew up in a middle-class environment. My parents had come from nothing, and they made that for us. But every house looked different, and everything was, no matter where you lived in Dublin, there was no such thing as, like, every street was identical going on for miles and miles and miles. But I didn't believe in that. I believe those things are consequences of what you want rather than goals in life in and of themselves. So marriage and children are not goals necessarily. They are consequences of your feelings for someone, and that's always been my belief. Is this the right person? That's me. Other people may see the world differently, and I respect that. But for me, it was, this must be something I feel I grow towards, and it becomes the state. This is the next stage, and this is what I want. Went back to London. Didn't go back to Canada because, well, things, you know, we went our separate ways.
Was music?
Music was always very much part of what I was doing. I was always hobbying, always building up bits and pieces of gear.
But this is before the launch of VNV, right?
VNV ostensibly started about 1989.
Oh,
no,
okay.
as a bedroom project. Like my first prototype ideas were like around 1990, 1989, and then I developed it. I wanted originally to write sort of soundtrack pieces for movies, but with very, very basic equipment. So in my head, it sounded bigger than it actually was. And then I developed my skills through the 90s, and you know, electronic music was, and people, what they did with it was a very big thing. And when I went to Canada, it had already been a really big thing. This industrial scene, which kind of comprised everything from people making crazy tape loops and drones or banging metal to people making electronic pieces that sounded like what you'd hear in a nightclub in a future science fiction film, and it was all a bit stylized. I don't know. I evolved. I listened to a lot of different styles of music, and I just kept going with it. And, there was a great band scene, and I made some great friends. I met them recently when I was in Toronto. I met all my friends. Circumstances just kept me from going back. I worked a job in London. I worked there for 6 years, and I absolutely loved it. And at the same time, I got to a point where I met somebody right after I got back to Europe who said, "Hey, we were always chatting online." This is in the mid-90s, so we were like text-based, dial-up internet, where there was no web browser involved. There was a screen that looked like something from War Games, with option 1 was...
monochrome green.
Right, monochrome green, right. And that's what I had in Toronto. So I was really experienced with the internet from 1990 onwards, and that's what I was bringing that into companies. They'd never had that before. So I came back to a project of bringing the internet into a company that... really wanted to excel in what they felt was the new field, and bringing that in and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I ended up doing lots of fun things. I really enjoyed it, but at the same time, my friend said, "Hey, we're releasing an album on a label. Would you like to present your demos?" And they listened to my demos, and I said, "These are just bedroom things that I've been going on for years. I can update them." They went, "Yeah, do it. Everyone's releasing everything." All right, so I released the very first release of VNV on a label. I was so enamored by it, but I thought, all right, a few people will buy it. Don't expect it to be great. Don't expect it to be legendary. But that got something out of the way, and now we get on to VNV. And I have to actually watch the time because we're almost at 3, and I've got a phoner. I've got a phoner in about 15 minutes, and then so I'll go through this as quick as I can. once you get the demos out of the way, you have a blank slate. The day I came home from the studio, I wrote the first 2 tracks for the next album, which became this landmark album for people called Praise the Fallen. And it was a very orchestral inspired album, very symphonic and also bombastic and what have you. And I did it under with limited equipment and limited idea or knowledge of production, and recorded in a studio in a short space of time. But I actually set this up as a project for me that I wanted to do for myself. I wanted to make an album that comprised myself at that time and only do it for me. I was never going to release it. I didn't want to. It felt like exposing myself. And I gave cassettes to friends, and they heard it, and they said, "This is just, you have to release this." And eventually other people heard it, and they were like, "Please, please, please." I ended up going on tour with the band in 98, and or 97. I went on was it 98 or 97? Oh God, I can't believe. No, 98. So I went on tour with the band. Before anyone ever heard of us, we were a support band on a tour in Germany, and the album wasn't even out. There were just a couple of tracks on compilations, and people loved it. And I don't know how, it just evolved from there. It's always been me in the studio writing the music. I had presented in the past an image of 2 people because there was a drummer who played live, and that was ostensibly it. It didn't go beyond that. In fact, there wasn't really looking back, and I almost compensated for it by telling people, "Oh yeah, or actually a lot of bands are like this. They don't even talk to each other when they walk away." And we never had any communication, never. And to be honest, in retrospect, I realized that, and I'm not trying to be disingenuous to people's memory of the band or anything like that, but that's who you saw live. That's the person who was pounding away on drums, and I was the guy at the front. And then the band expanded. It was originally just the 2 of us. That's why you saw it in the photos. And I felt it was better than just being a solo artist. I never wanted to be this. I wasn't the guy standing in front of the mirror with the tennis racket or pretending to play a keyboard or anything like that. I did this because it gave me an intense emotion, and having to adapt to how to present myself live. Well, I came out on stage, I was scared out of my mind, and I inverted my anxiety into kind of an attack where I used it almost like a shield, and it has served me ever since, because I have a lot of social anxiety. I still do to this day. I'm still going to be quirky, still the oddball. But I've found my place where I can sit in my own studio in a room, and I'm just lost in what I do. And it's grown and evolved, and I've, tried things that didn't quite reach where I wanted. But I got to a point in the last decade, which has almost been leading up to this point, where I feel like finally opened up this magic door. Like everything's a level. If you learn a language to a point, and suddenly you get frustrated, and then you master that. Suddenly something clicks. You don't know why. You just jump up another level. And I've done that. I don't know how many more levels there are to go, but I've got some big projects planned for next year. And that when I told those ideas back to myself, and I thought about it, like, you would never have done this 5 years ago. You want to play a planetarium with all your analog synths, and doing a VR show. You want to do this? Like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. You want to perform the album live in a live room? And I went, yeah. I love this album. It's not just a nice record or the latest cool record. This is something far beyond music for me. It is not the individual songs, it's the whole thing. I like embracing other styles of music. We have a hardcore drummer who works with us in Europe, and his skills are in one direction. Chris, who works with us here, his skills go in another direction. And I've really envisaged doing incredible projects with them, even setting themselves up to be able to do a solo project where they are able to control and trigger everything, and doing all the pre-production for that. I do the videos for our shows. I want to know what I do in VNV Nation? Would you like to know?
Yes.
I write the music, I produce it, I sing, I write the lyrics, I manage the band, I run the record label, I design the merchandise, organize the production, I do the website, I do all that, I manage the social media, and I do it because I'm just, if I didn't, I would probably sit there bored, staring at a wall. I've worked with other people. There are very few people I've met who are able to keep up, or able to grasp what I'm trying to do, or offer something that I hadn't anticipated that is just as good. that, wow, I never anticipated that as another aspect of what I do. And I haven't met a lot of those. Those I have around me. I've got an incredible lighting designer. There's this picture that I posted from the Montreal show, and that tells you this is the image I had in my head of how the very first song should be played and how it should look. And I worked with our LD in Europe, and I said, Martin, you work with a lot of bands where they expect you to put on a show. They don't talk to you about it beforehand. Nobody even tells you. I want to craft shows, and I'm a big fan of a guy called Norman Belgettis. He's like my hero. And he was a theatre designer, back in the stage designer, back in the 20s. He's a savant. He went through everything. Like, he got a job in a newspaper. He reinvented inks, experimented, and created new inks so they could produce the color as he wanted it. He redesigned everything he put his hand to. He redesigned it. He was just an incredible creative force. Frustrated by everything, he just left his imprint on everything. Why we have a Super Trooper today is because of Norman Belgettis. The spotlight that follows people around the stage. Yeah. Because he had images in his head of how he wanted a stage production to be presented, and the technology was not available. Up until that point, people did theatre like Greek theatre. They just stood on stage and walked around. The lights didn't change. Right. He had a splinter of light from a giant height. And this splinter of light was the epic moment that you knew this person is in the underworld. That's the crack in the surface, because he wanted to represent that, so he invented the technology to do that. And he was the person who came up with the idea of, if you go into a theatre and nobody knows who he is except his daughter, who played Miss Ellie on Dallas. Okay. Barbara Belgettis. Anyway, so Norman Belgettis then wrote a book called Horizons in the late 20s, which basically described how to streamline everything. And I'm a big fan of 30s design, architecture, and all that. Art Deco and streamline modern those are my jams. I'm absolutely obsessed with them. I have some cars. I am involved in a ton of vintage events where we all dress up in all the old, everything. I mean, to the nth degree, but we're not anal about it. We're not like otaku. We're just living it and having fun. Everyone talks like it's the era. I can't do that. I don't want to do that. But it's all very much etiquette and politeness and everything, and it's not about... And the women involved in it are not treated. Nobody treats them like the women back in the day. No one comes back with those old things. Oh yeah, they're dearie. Women were so strong in the 20s, far stronger than a lot of people give them credit for today, because we look back with a different glass over our faces. There was so much power and movement in the achieving the vote and everything like that. So all the women in the vintage group, man, they're choosing to be, I want to be elegant, I want to be finesse and everything like that, just as the men are. It's phenomenal. And the passion and the camaraderie in it is exceptional, so I do that. But, if you go into a theatre, just last thing, you go into a theatre and you see the lights buried inside this little canopy that they aimed down the crowd, the idea of the front truss, he came up with that. So the thing is, I invite you to read the book. You can get it as a PDF online, because it's about creativity. The book is purely describing to every creative person.
What's it called again?
Horizons, by Norman Belgettis. And every single creative person, I have a friend who designs airplanes. I have a friend who designs circuit boards. I have a friend who's a painter. I have a friend who's a photographer. And all of them have read it, and they all said every bit of it. It's like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's like, it doesn't matter what it's talking about. The message is, the parallel in it is there. And he describes the origin of creativity and what it meant to look back at art in the past. What an unbelievably strange pattern of subjects we have covered here today, children.
That's basically how this podcast goes. I do want to say this. Unfortunately, I'm not able to stay to see your show tonight, and it might be the most disappointed I've ever been to miss a show. After having spoken to you now, all I want to do is see you perform live.
There's so much positivity in it. I mean, there's stagecraft in it, but I can't stay this. I made a promise to myself I would never be anyone other than myself on stage. I don't believe in wearing the facade, but I demonstrate, and through the songs I show all of my sides, and we work as a team, and it's amazing. I mean, we even if it's just all set up and it's all very symmetric, I'm so OCD in that respect. So when you see the lights looking like that, this almost cathedral-esque arrangement of the lights, this is something that there's one woman who went to the show in Europe, and she said, I stood right in the middle. And she said, I got the exact same thrill I get watching a Wes Anderson film, in the symmetric sense of that is absolutely nail perfect, like razor sharp symmetric. And I said, I do exactly the same thing, and I know exactly what you're feeling. But I run around, I interact with people, because people who are the show, they're 50% of this, and it is very much a unity concert. It's not you stand and watch a spectacle. I don't want that. You are part of that show. The essence of the show is your reaction, your vibe, your interaction. I try to get people involved. I try to get them to sing lyrics or to cheer or to clap or whatever. Whatever gets them feeling, breaking out of their shell and involved in the show, that makes the best show, and we give more back as a result.
That's incredible. The new album is called Noir. VNV Nation is the name of the group. You guys are touring all over North America and heading over to Europe.
Yeah, well, we're going back for a second run in Europe. The album went top 5 in Germany, so there's a lot of demand for shows. This is the best bit. Any of you kind of independents out there, I run my own label. I place my own ads. And I basically coordinate with people I need to work with to do the things I do. It's quite a job list, but you can get it done if you plan it out right and you schedule it correctly. However, doing this myself with people I work with who are incredible, I can go up against any major. There's nobody stopping you from reaching the heights that you want to reach. Nobody at all. You can do everything. It's absolutely, this world's actually blown everything open. I started doing this in 2002, very daunted by it. And I have learned since that a major subdivision offered me a label contract, and they said, would you like to come and, we want to sign you. And my publicist and publisher came with me, same person. And he opened up the meeting and he said, well, this is Ronan. And they've never met an artist who's also doing all the business. They don't. In fact, a lot of people find that very hard to deal with. Imogen Heap has the exact problem. I've heard from people, because she's an incredible creative force, an immense creative force. And somebody compared me to her in just how I do things. And I thought that was quite the compliment, because I'm a big admirer of her work. But I sat back in the room thinking, okay, I have to let someone else talk to the label people, because they just do not talk to artists. Let's say, would you like a coffee? Hello? Would you like some drugs?
Right.
So he said, well, what can you offer? Well, we can sign you and it's going to be wonderful. We're a great team. And I went, okay. Ronan sold 25,000 copies of the album at that time when people bought CDs. Sold 25,000 copies of the album when it was released, using his phone and a few adverts. What can you do? And they had nothing. And that's the thing. It's like, if you're motivated, the great thing is the kids who are brought up on iPads. You think like FKA Twigs, people who create their own videos, create their own music, their own style. People like Lorne. I actually love this incredible spread of energy in music that's all under the commercial radar, but coming up with the most exciting videos, the most exciting ideas, soundscapes that are outside of the norm, breaking all the rules, because they didn't grow up with the rules, they taught themselves. And that's the beauty of this world. We're learning, like garage bands invented, like you want to go talk about rock, if there's rock people watching this, Sabbath invented their style for themselves. There was nobody before that saying, hey, you guys should, sound like this, or it was an evolution. The great rock artists in the late 60s and 70s made this. They created something new. And they did it for themselves. Garage bands making punk and saying, no, we don't need to be formed. Even if we can play badly, we can cover that up with distortion patterns. But we can, it's the fact that we're playing like that underlines what we're trying to say. Like everything, it was... what do you call it? Like it was as required. It's almost like the universe provided. You play like that, your message obviously is this. They're not going to sing about the Buzzcocks did it. They sang about picnics and nice lovely honey days and stuff like that. But you get the idea. You can do whatever you want in whatever. And I know a ton of creative people out there in the world who are doing this, whether it be video, photography, whatever, manage themselves they need help. No person is an island. You have to work with like minds. You have to keep finding the people who are not the sycophants and the people who are utilizing you as a raw material to further their own end game. There is a symbiosis relationship. Everybody depends on everybody. And like this, I need to get out to the world, so you exist, but you want to talk to me about stuff, well, okay, I'll say lots of nice, interesting things. And we have this wonderful relationship. There's this chemistry in that. That's mutually beneficial, benevolent, wonderful. That's how I would like things to go, and I've built up a network that's like that, and I don't want it to be any other way.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes, sir, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Check out VNV Nation, folks. We'll see you next time.
All right, take care.
All right, folks, that'll do it for this episode of the AVB Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to go down and click on the subscribe button to make sure that you can continue seeing our episodes as we put them out. We do a lot of videos, and there's a couple of them here that we hope you'll enjoy. There's one up there that we think you might like, and of course, there's one of our playlists down there for you. Make sure you say hello to some of our sponsors in the links down below while you're there, and of course, you can find links there to today's guest and all of our other social media. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time.